This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on groups leading the emergence of 21st century power, we're going to talk with Morgan Scott, Vice President for Global Partnerships and Outreach with the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI, a research organization focused on power sector solutions. Morgan's going to talk about EPRI's mission, its past achievements, and its wide-ranging work in this critical moment in the energy world. Morgan took over leadership of EPRI's Global Partnerships and Outreach program this year. She was formerly director of EPRI's Climate Ready program on utility resilience, and she formerly headed up as research manager its Sustainability and Ecosystem Stewardship program. She began her now over 10-year career at EPRI as a technical lead and project manager for sustainability. And before joining EPRI, Morgan spent almost 7 years at Consolidated Edison, New York City's dominant electric utility. So Morgan, what is the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI? What's its history and current membership? And more importantly, maybe, what's its mission?
Well, Herman, first let me say thank you so much for inviting me onto the podcast today. It's really a privilege to be able to be with you and to do just that, to talk about EPRI, who we are, and what we do. So EPRI was actually founded in 1972, and we often say we were born of a blackout. So there was a blackout in the mid-60s that led to a wide variety of conversations and actually congressional hearings where it was identified that there was a real lack of research to support the industry. And so two different organizations were born out of that blackout. There was NERC, and then there was EPRI. And EPRI was really founded to address that gap in the research needs. So we're actually a nonprofit 501c3 research organization, and we're really focused on advancing R&D in all aspects of how we make, move, and ultimately use electricity. And
Morgan, hang on. Before we go on, just so we don't leave our listeners in the dark, NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and they have a sort of a responsibility to monitor reliability, whereas EPRI is focused, I think, largely on research. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. Very different organizations, but both really coming out of that blackout for those important reasons. So, and so as we focus on the research and in our nonprofit kind of status, we're really focused, to your point around mission, we have a public benefit mission. So we are really thinking about how do we innovate? How do we solve the really critical questions that are impacting the energy system, and how can we make it more efficient and effective for society at large? And I think one thing that's really important there too is that's a global question, right? So we have offices and are headquartered here in the US, but we also have offices in Dublin and Dubai. We have 3 major labs where we do research, 1 substation in Lenox, Massachusetts. But at the end of the day, we're actually collaborating with more than 450 organizations in 40 countries. So that's a pretty significant global footprint. I think when you think about those numbers of organizations too, it really speaks to the collaborative model, which is part of that public benefit mission too, right? So a big focus for us is how do we bring a wide variety of perspectives to the research table, right? There's so much experience and expertise that we can really leverage to ensure the rigor and value of the research that we're doing. So we're working alongside industry, with academia, with government, and we have a wide variety of ways that stakeholders can provide input to the research, either kind of more formally in a government's perspective through our advisory council as we set the big picture research portfolio, all the way down to the project level. It's really, I love the collaborative model aspect of the Institute, and I really think it's from that posture of collaboration that we can really tackle these questions and build that power system of tomorrow that we really need.
Yeah. I've written about a lot of these things that EPRI does, and I want to get a little more concrete. I've written about EPRI's very recent effort to facilitate power provider access to artificial intelligence. And I was talking to EPRI CEO Arshad Mansour, and he was saying, if you just can bring what EPRI knows to other utilities, that can go a long way towards solving the problem. That's how much EPRI knows. But and I've written about EPRI's effort to standardize distribution system technologies, which again, that's an effort that EPRI is collaborating with other groups around the world on. And I've written about the program at EPRI to help utilities be more resilient to extreme weather. That's a program that you helped lead, and I hope we can talk about that a little bit more. But setting aside that program, which you helped lead, Climate Ready, give us an overview of EPRI's current power sector and sustainability work.
Yeah, well, I'd love to talk climate ready all day. And I appreciate all you've written for us. But yeah, there are so many incredible examples of the work that we do. And when you did my introduction, you talked about my background in sustainability. And I want to underscore that I think we have an incredible portfolio of research focused on sustainability here at the Institute. So we explore things like what are sustainability metrics? How do you actually quantify the value of sustainability? But I also think it's from that background that I have that I would make the argument that all the research that we do here at EPRI is about sustainability, right? Because really at the end of the day, if you think about that triple bottom line of economic, environmental, and societal value, that is our research. That is who we are. We are really focused on how do you enhance the value of the way we operate, maintain, and build out this system, then respect the fact that we have that public benefit mission. We're thinking about society, but we're also looking to reduce environmental impact. So it's a long-winded way of saying like it's all sustainability. I also really love, we're about to publish a thought leadership piece that we're calling Powering Progress, Protecting the Planet. And it really recognizes that we're at, as you mentioned in your question, right? We're at this really incredible time for this industry of massive load growth. And that comes from different places, right? We've got industrialization, we've got computation, and that is both in terms of AI, which you mentioned, but also cryptocurrency. And we have electrification. Electrification isn't going anywhere anytime soon either. So we've got this massive load growth. And what we're saying in this piece is that as the power industry invests to meet that load growth, and I mean invest both in terms of investing in building new things, but also investing in the solutions that enable more efficiency and flexibility for the assets we own. I think that's really important. It's the system we have today. How do we get the most out of it today? And then it's also how do we add to it? But as we make those investments, we have to balance the trade-offs and really think about prioritizing the energy sources that are reliable, affordable, abundant, resilient, right? But also minimize the harm to land, water, air, and biodiversity. So that is that balanced scorecard. That is how we power progress and protect the planet. So you talk about AI, we have to talk about AI. We've got a lot happening in this space and on both sides of the coin, right? So on one side, there's how do we power AI? On the other side, it's how does AI actually empower this industry? So when we think about powering AI, we actually launch, and I'm sure you're aware of DC Flex. That's our new
Right.
initiatives that launched last fall. And this is all about how do we flex data center load? Can we do it? And if so, how, right? And since the fall, it's really exciting that we've got more than 40 entities that have joined. And I think what's cool about this is we've really bridged the gap between the tech sector and the power sector. So it's not just the power companies that are in DC Flex. It's the hyperscalers, right? Meta, Google, Microsoft, they're at the table. It's NVIDIA, it's Schneider, it's developers like QTS and Compass, right? We've brought these various entities to the table at a critical point when we see data center growth to really test out what are the options we have to flex that load? And if we actually pilot them, what do we see? Let's get some real data. Let's really understand what happens so that can inform decision making on all sides, right? So our first cohort of pilot projects has been identified. I wish I could tell you more. Stay tuned month, and we'll be talking about that first cohort. But I can't wait to get some results from that,
Yeah,
and start moving that conversation. So that's powering AI, and then, like I said, the other side is how do you let AI empower the industry? So we launched, I think it was about 2 months ago at the NVIDIA GTI conference, the Open Power AI Consortium.
that's the one I
Gosh,
heard about.
yeah, and this one, man, Herman, it's moving fast. We've got over 80 organizations formally signed down, many more to come. I feel like every day we have a new one coming in. Our LLM, our electric sector domain specific LLM development, well underway. So I'm excited for that to launch
Large
this
language.
year. Large language model, yeah.
Yeah,
And then I am excited about, at the end of the day, this consortium with so many different organizations. I think we're going to have the ability to really identify use cases where we really could use AI. And it's not just identifying them, but I think we have the right people at the table, that collaborative model again, to build the solutions, to come together and bring to fruition these applications that I think, have the opportunity to revolutionize the way we do things. So it's
yeah,
it's a it's a wild time in AI, and we're in it.
yeah. Oh, you're leading it. I think that's something really worth highlighting. I've been People have been talking about using the computing powers that are being used on the internet every day now in the power sector because we have issues with cost, we have issues with wildfires, we have issues with crazy weather, we have issues with uh, power outages, and AI, the compute power that we describe as AI, can solve a lot of that. But you have two different sectors. You have the tech sector and you have the power sector.
Right.
EPRI has brought them together, and people have been talking about where they cross over, but EPRI's doing something about it. They say that about the weather. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. EPRI has done something about it. I think that's a really interesting thing that EPRI has led in. I want to go back real quick, Morgan. I want to talk about something. You stressed sustainability in all your work. Briefly, I have been thinking a lot about how much the world has to do to create a sustainable environment. It's not just uh, green power, it's not just emissions free transportation. It's how do we create um, mining of metals and rare earth elements that is sustainable? How do we
Yeah.
protect the earth, the oceans? Your sustainability programs must have gotten a little bit into that, didn't they?
Yeah, so we definitely think about sustainability from a holistic perspective. And so I think you've raised some really important points that are worth underscoring. So, initially I think about that definition, which I alluded to before, but I think is really critical. That is, sustainability is about value creation and consideration of the environment and society, right? So there really is this three piece, and you really have to think about all three pieces. You also brought up, when you frame this, around emissions reductions, right? And greenhouse gases. And that is absolutely a component of it, but it's one component of many components, right? As I talk about the balance
Yeah,
scorecard, I talk about environment broadly, right? There's land, water, biodiversity, emissions, and air quality. They're all a part of that environmental equation, that we need to consider, because they all impact communities, society, and they're all a part of our planet. They work in tandem as a system. We focus on the power system, but it turns out the earth is a system as well. And so we need to think about it as a system and how those pieces go together. So I think that's really important. And I think we've got some meaningful work that looks at this question around sustainability for the power industry, but also recognizes that the power industry is part of a bigger picture as well, right? There's upstream, there's downstream, there's supply chain, there's customers. It all goes together. And when you pull a lever in one place, it has an impact somewhere else. And so you need to really be thinking about where all those levers impact and what the actions are, and what the outcomes are, and really think about what those trade offs mean, and how you optimize for them. I think that's what sustainability is about, optimizing value by really thinking about the best trade-offs and the best way to manage them in a way that is optimal for everyone.
And there's a ton of work to do in that area. It's really exciting that EPRI is part of it. Um, we've talked about this big picture now. I want to come down to something specific. You headed up the EPRI's Climate Ready program. It's an effort. It's an effort by EPRI to help utilities become resilient as
Yeah.
we face a really dynamic world climate with increasingly extreme weather, and we face it in an interestingly charged political moment. Um, what Tell us about Climate Ready and what the work is, and tell us a little bit about what policies we might be thinking about to address the climate through Climate Ready or with Climate Ready.
Yeah, so READY stands for Resilience and Adaptation Initiative, as you note. And we launched it as an effort in 2022, and it was intended to be a 3-year effort to develop a comprehensive and consistent way for assessing physical climate risks. So, to your point that you made, that's extreme weather today, but that's also those longer term climatic trends. And really across the power system. So again, generation, transmission, distribution, and utilization in some specific cases. And so we really did that because we recognized there were a lot more questions that were being raised around physical climate risk and these extreme weather impacts, but no kind of baseline starting point to address them. People were doing things, right? But there
Yeah,
wasn't like a respected methodological approach to saying like, yeah, that's the technically appropriate, rigorous, scientifically defensible way to do that. Enter EPRI. That was the goal.
right.
And
And
I,
Morgan,
yeah,
I want, excuse me for interrupting, but I just want to
no,
say that point you just made is really relevant. I did a story about utilities preparing for extreme weather, and
mm,
several of them told me they don't even want to file their resilience programs until they hear what EPRI concludes in its Climate Ready program about what is needed, how much to spend, where to put the
yeah.
efforts, that sort of thing. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the framework is intended to do, right? And the and the challenging part there is there's no right answer because climate is actually hyper local, right? We all experience the same weather variables, but we experience them in different ways, and that's okay. So we needed a framework that's flexible and recognizes that like your local climate's going to be different, your organization's going to be different, the assets you have, the geography you live on, right? So there are many inputs that inform the decision you're going to make, but the framework gives you the guidance documents, the references, and the tools to tackle that analysis. So it's a well-informed framework. We had over 40 companies in the US, Canada, UK, and France that participated, and over 100 stakeholders. And we just launched this framework. So we did our in-person launch 2 weeks ago in New York. We did the virtual launch last week. So the framework is out there. We publish transparently all of the deliverables. And like I said, there's these guidance how-to documents. They are the step-by-step. How do you do an exposure assessment? How do you take that to vulnerability, right? How do I actually get my climate data and input it into the different power system analysis kind of activities that I might be doing? The references serve as the technical rationale. They explain here's why you're taking these steps, and then the
Uh,
tools fill those gaps. So there are tools out there. We weren't looking to reinvent the wheel, right? No sense in doing that. But there were also some gaps. So we've, where appropriate, developed tools to help companies actually apply the framework. And there are a lot of big picture learnings that we've come across, which I think is important. Like data is critical. You're only as resilient as your neighbor. We were really seeking to. I talked about bridging the gap before. It's such a the EPRI role as convener and kind of facilitator of these kinds of things. Just I see it so many times, but this is another great one where it's really bridging the gap between the climate science community and the power system folks, because power system engineers shouldn't be climate scientists, right? That's not fair to
right.
ask. And further, climate scientists shouldn't be expected to be power system engineers. But we wanted to give them the tools to be able to have the same language and be able to talk and ask the right questions together. So I think we've achieved that. I think, one thing you asked too around policy, I had a
Yeah.
free pass on this one a little bit because our nonprofit organization, Objective Independent, we don't advocate. So we tend to stay out of the policy conversations. But what I will say is we have really been thinking about investment prioritization. How do you make decisions when comparing different adaptation strategies about where you're going to invest? And this is important because, as you mentioned, you said that you talked to companies who were waiting to file right
Yeah.
with their commissioners. This is an investment justification question, right? And we were hearing that as well. So when we actually launched in 2022, one of the first papers we did was on proactive investment. And it was a literature review. And I'll be the first to tell you there wasn't a lot of literature out there, but it was all consistent in demonstrating that actually proactive investment in resilience was lower cost than respond and repair after an event. That's an important thing to recognize, right? But when we think about the power system, right, and the regulatory kind of construct within which it operates, that is future investment in uncertain events, and we need to be able to demonstrate value to customers that are paying today. That can be done, right? But it's a little bit more complicated a conversation, and I think that's where Ready comes into play. We developed investment prioritization guidance. It's not one size fits all, right? It talks about cost benefit analysis. It talks about multi criterion analysis, which allows you to do maybe a little bit more qualitative assessment and kind of prioritize from that perspective. But I think it's an excellent starting point as we think about this question around what are we going to invest in and why, and then that goes to if it's a regulated utility, which we have a lot of those that are participating, but it provides that rigorous approach to investment prioritization. And we're going to be spending a lot of time this summer going out to the regulator regional meetings, talking about Ready, introducing them to the materials, because that's going to be an important conversation over the next 5 years or so as companies are doing climate ready assessments with the framework and then using it only matters if it's used, right? Like, I'm so happy that the framework is done, but it's not meaningful until it's used and it's driving change. And that will happen when the framework is applied, the analysis is done, decisions are made, it goes to regulators, and we actually are making investments and seeing the system become more resilient. And I'm really excited. I believe that will happen. And I'm looking forward to hearing about it when it does. I think we'll hear about it in the next couple of years.
Great. I think we're going to have to leave it there. Morgan, I'm glad you mentioned this investment aspect of resilience. Of course, Climate Ready is, in its simplest terms, allowing people in the power system to either avoid outages from extreme weather and extreme events or to recover from them. But it's much more complex than that. And I personally have been thinking a lot about the aspect of investment because you
Mm,
hear so much about affordability in the
yeah.
power world these days. It's becoming very expensive, but we also need to modernize, which means investing. So it's just another example of EPRI's leadership that you're coming right at that nexus between the modernization need and the need to protect affordability. But we're going to be doing a lot more with that subject in the future on the podcast. For now, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank my guest, Electric Power Research Institute Vice President Morgan Scott, for describing what EPRI is, what it does, what it's accomplished, and what its current priorities are as it leads in power sector solutions. I also want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.